Hi, Michael. This is Taina and Michael. And how do you want people to know you? Because I know you do edible spirit.
Yes, I mean, edible spirit is what I'm called when I'm working, but otherwise Michael. Everybody calls me Mikey, but otherwise it's Michael. Yeah.
Yes. So what we're doing is we're talking about Michael as a third stage or possibly late second, third stage Scorpio. Now, do you remember anything about those stages, Michael?
I believe it was when you told me there's like, I remember there was like, one of them was like hard on the sleeve Scorpio.
Yeah.
And one of them was maybe secret Scorpio. But then I also remember, I know one of them's serpent, one of them's eagle, right?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. Scorpio is the only sign that has retained all of its old symbols.
Wow.
And what was her name? She's very famous. Linda Houghton. Been quarantined forever. Linda Goodman's sun signs. She described the 3 stages of Scorpio, not the 3 stages, but the 3 symbols, because she didn't know particularly about the 3 stages. But she talked about how Scorpio is the scorpion, the gray lizard, and the eagle. Now, other symbols associated with Scorpio are the serpent, of course, and the phoenix. Now, to me, the phoenix is second, third stage Scorpio.
Okay.
But the first stage Scorpio person for 3 or 4 lifetimes is born with a very strong sense of their purpose and a sense that they come here and they're so almost sent here by the divine who is somewhere up there off on a cloud or a mountain glaring at everybody, and that it's really, really important to get this purpose fulfilled no matter what. It doesn't matter what happens to you. It doesn't matter what happens to some smaller participants in the situation, even if you may regret what happens to them. But it's just important to make sure no matter what, this higher purpose that's more important than everything else gets fulfilled. So the scorpion, it often exists in very dry climates. And the first stage Scorpio, it's almost as if they've come to this desert world. Things are really harsh. Everything is, all the stakes are very high. You have to make sure you get everything done. Now, really when you talk about heart on the sleeve Scorpio, underneath it all, that's pretty much every Scorpio. Because really Scorpios are big sweetie pies, but they've come in at stage and there's this huge sense of mission. And it's so much more important than anything, including myself, that they have to acquire ruthlessness. So they have to have that scorpion shell and that scorpion stinger. And for 3 or 4 lifetimes, they go along fulfilling the purpose. But because the essential underlying perspective is one of separation, we are separate from that divine, we are separate from one another, and that's a spiritual illusion. It can't work perfectly. You will fail at what you're trying to do. I'm thinking of a particular first stage Scorpio who's very, very prominent right now in so many people's minds while I'm talking about this. But anyway, so after 3 or 4 lifetimes of trying to fulfill that purpose, some of it has been achieved and some of it hasn't been. So then there's this sense of, oh boy, you know, I've kind of failed, I kind of blew it, and that doesn't feel that great. But then when you look back behind you, sometimes on a soul level, you're looking back 3 or 4 lifetimes and you're seeing this long string of bodies. You never really want to hurt anybody, but it seemed like, you know, the ends justified the means, and all of a sudden it starts to feel like, oh my God, what have I done? Now, some Scorpios at that point start to think, well, I have been bad, so I'm just going to get really bad. Maybe you might relate to that one from some other lifetime, Michael.
No, I mean, I had a past life reading, my first past life reading ever, before I sort of had my own understanding of them and how they worked and whatnot. And there was a large portion of it that was, I feel like, this one lady's projections onto me. She was very convinced that I was in a homosexual relationship because I had done so many horrible things in the past, and like I hated women and had to repent with women, and it was very, you know, punitive Judeo-Christian. It didn't feel like an actual past life reading. But what she did say that resonated was she called out places in my lineage, in my DNA, and in my, you know, and she called out Greece, she called out Mongolia, you know, she called out these different places, and called out that I was both spiritually and sexually like complicated, manipulative, and aggressive. And one of the things that she told me was that my mom and I had shared a past life. This very much resonated, where I was a Greek priest.
Wow.
And my mom was my wife and was the preacher's wife, and that I was a philanderer and was going all over the place, sleeping with people, cheating people, stealing people, and my wife knew it, but in order to keep up appearances, she didn't say anything. So she was sort of calling back to this. But what she said to me that didn't resonate was, you as a Mongol and as a rampaging horde, committed all of these atrocities, and like, that's why you're gay, right? I was like, I
don't know if I can link those two quite precisely.
Me neither. And what was weird was that the part of having committed atrocities,
yes,
and grappling with power and potency in this life, and like, what am I supposed to do with all this? That's why I laughed at what you just said, because
right.
I think at that point I probably had doubled down, and I was like, well, I'm just going to take what I want in order to do what I got to do.
Right. Yes, that's very first stage Scorpio. And see, the Mongols, that was their culture. That was the way things were done.
Right.
So for you to not have committed atrocities, if you were in the kind of a high place in their culture, and I have a lot of ties. I have a past life in the Mongol culture. I was female, but I have a lot of ties to people who have that past. I just adore yurts because, of course, being female, that was your world, right? It was the yurt.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I understand that culture very, very well. And my son and I, my younger son, he was one of Genghis Khan's closest confidants. And I remember he and I having a discussion one time about our two favorite great men of power, because he just adores Genghis Khan and I adore Shaka Zulu. So we were going on and on about details about their lives and how amazing they were. And all of a sudden I stopped and went, wait a minute, these two guys sound too much alike. They have to be the same soul. It was really this, makes so much sense, right?
Beautiful.
The same soul went and did the same thing in two different cultures.
Right. So. Beautiful. And it carried out that purpose, as you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly. So that was a big part of, and so that was that first stage Scorpio of, I have to do this because this is a bigger purpose that has so much importance. Because Genghis Khan's perspective was, this is what he was doing for his people. Exactly the same thing as Shaka Zulu. I think they were Scorpios, both of them, actually. There's no record of what sign they were. But again, their lives have a quality of first stage Scorpio, absolutely.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I love getting this whole soul perspective, because I see that with a lot of people, but I don't often talk to people who can tell me their own experiences that they remember or that they resonate with. So that's pretty cool.
Most definitely. And that was actually something that was corroborated by my father before he passed, where he was he mentioned, and I jumped when you said this to me just now too, because that idea, I had started seeing it in sessions with people of, I'd ask a question, get a kind of answer, but then I called it the Rolodex, because it would be like a Rolodex of their lives going brrr. And at first I would be a little overwhelmed by it, but then started to sort of see the symbology of it, which is sometimes people aren't ready to hear some of that information. So it's actually more affirming and healing for them to know that it's something that happened like in their lineage, or something that happened in their soul lineage many ages ago, so that's very cool. I vibe off it too. It was great when you said that.
Yes. So by the end of first stage Scorpio, if you decide to be really bad, because that perspective is, well, now I feel like there's a time of reckoning coming, and I'm going to put it off as long as I can. That's the optional bad Scorpio.
Yeah.
And some of them will go straight into it right away, and some of them will put it off. And then, of course, some Scorpios will crossroad. They will go from first stage to third stage. And that saves you a lot of grief. That saves you 3 or 4 lifetimes of going through second stage. But if we don't go through second stage, we don't gain quite as much compassion. We don't get the same amount of depth. So there is no right or wrong in terms of which choice you take at the end of first stage, because crossroading means to go straight from first stage to third stage. So when the time of reckoning comes, whether it's you're being as bad as you possibly can until you finally get cornered. So who was that famous first stage Scorpio? It's hot. I don't like it when my brain doesn't work as well when it's hot. But the famous murder of the Manson family, Charles Manson, he was the end of that, really sort of the bad third stage Scorpio. The interesting thing is that if you look at his life, you can see places where he had the opportunity to crossroad, because he was really looking at so many different spiritual principles. And
Right.
he was, there was that place where he could have made a big leap, or, probably possibly still could.
Right.
At any rate, if the person doesn't make that leap to third stage, then they go down into second stage. And then what happens is that's when the regret just hits you. That's when that natural, loving, giving, heart in their sleeve, as you would call it, Scorpio piece comes back out and goes, oh my God, what have I done? How could I have hurt so many people? Oh, it's just terrible. I must be horrible. I must be awful. I have to just totally destroy myself somehow. And so early second stage Scorpio, there's a lot of very destructive, unpleasant experiences and a lot of abusive experiences a lot of people have in early second stage Scorpio. As second stage progresses, it becomes a bit lessened. But what happens throughout second stage is that there's that same willfulness that happened in first stage Scorpio comes into second stage Scorpio and says, well, I have to pay somehow, and it's almost impossible to pay for all of that, but I will pay by denying myself the most precious thing in life, which is love. So during second stage Scorpio, constant rejections. And the poor person, because it's several lifetimes, they come into a new lifetime and they're that good, open, honest soul, and they just keep getting smeared all the time and rejected and abused, and they don't know why. Also, the other thing that happens is that second stage Scorpio people feel like, well, it was their sense of purpose and being in a position where they could harm people with that purpose that also caused a lot of trouble. So they want to sabotage their purpose. They want to sabotage their career. And again, when they go into a new lifetime in second stage, it's not conscious. So poor second stage Scorpios, why does nobody love me? Why is everybody treating me so awful? Why can't I achieve anything I want to achieve? Or in some cases, why don't I even know what I want out of life or what my purpose even is?
Right.
There's all ways to subdue that. And that's the symbol of the gray lizard. So the symbol of the gray lizard is this. It's the gray lizard that just hides itself in the mud at the bottom of the river and goes into hibernation. So it's this complete self-abnegation that happens in second stage Scorpio. Not much fun. I really, I don't envy Scorpios. I really don't.
No, it's so, I resonate strongly with that. I think the thing about it that I've tried to understand with myself is that the suffering is not for naught, as long as you can remember that it's not for naught, and I think that's what I have, as you see, I have Virgo rising, and like my Virgo rising and my Scorpio sun, they're the signs that I talk the most shit about in the zodiac. I'm like, oh, sorry. My Virgo rising and my Scorpio sun, they're the signs that I talk the most smack about in the zodiac. Okay. And it's so funny because I find myself judging Virgos and Scorpios, and then I'm like, wait a minute. And so now I just own it. I'm like, oh no, I am the worst. Like, we are the worst. But I think the thing I didn't understand for a lot of my life too was that not everybody who's not a Scorpio or doesn't have Scorpio in them is this intense.
Right.
There's not that desire. Like, I kind of always want to get into it. Yes. And I wonder, once we talk about the third, but I definitely feel like I've gone through waves of first and second Scorpio through a lot of my life. And I think when I'm at my worst and when I'm at my worst is when I become inert. I bury myself in the mud. And, I definitely, I've had a reader tell me too before that some of the worst traumas that happened in my life were were as a result of denying myself love. Yes. And that the traumas had to occur to show me what I had done by burying my head in the mud.
That's right. Yes. And that's classic second, third stage.
Okay.
Because what's going on when we're in second, third stage is each stage lasts for 3 or 4 lifetimes. Each transition between the stages lasts for 1 to 4 decades.
Okay.
From soul perspective, that's a much shorter period of time. And that's why everything is so intense when we're in the transition. And it feels like never, when we're earlier in the transition, it feels like I'll never get through this. It's hopeless. I have to somehow hope this will get better one day. I don't know how it will. You know, it's a lot of despair that comes into play at times. But then there's all this inspiration. Because the other thing that goes on is each stage has a particular part of the mind or the psyche that is dominant. So in first stage of any sign, it is the conscious mind that's dominant. We just have a conscious perspective. We go and do what we feel we have to do. In second stage, even though we think our conscious mind is dominant, actually our subconscious mind is dominant. So we're being controlled by subconscious patterns that are reactions to the traumas that occurred at the end of first stage. In third stage, the higher self is the dominant part of the psyche. So when we're in second, third stage, we've got the higher self and the subconscious kind of jockeying for position. Our conscious mind is building more and more of a relationship with the higher self in order to transmute those subconscious patterns. And so all this spiritual force is pouring into our lives and stimulating all these subconscious patterns to bring them up to the surface where we can work on them and transform them.
Makes
so
sense.
That's what's been going on with you now. What some people do, and you might have done your own little, very unique, specific version of this. Some people, if they're born into the transition, they will create a recap lifetime where they're basically reliving first and second stage and then heading into third stage as though they've done it all in one lifetime. Some people have asked me, can you do all three stages in one lifetime? And I've said, well, not really, but there is such a thing as doing that recap, which is I think it's a really useful thing to do. I didn't do it personally, but when I've seen other people do it, you know, it's great to actually have living access to all of those patterns and all of those experiences and live them out again. Plus, some signs, mainly Aries and Scorpio, are benefited by, when they're in second stage, going back and getting some first stage traits just to try and balance themselves. Because, you know, they both Aries and Scorpio are very, you know, assertive and aggressive and self-oriented or purpose-oriented in first stage. It's self-oriented for Aries and purpose-oriented for Scorpio, but they're both very self-denying in second stage. So if you can get a little piece of first stage back, you know, it kind of, you get the scorpion to kick the gray lizard out of the mud. That's basically what we're doing.
Most definitely. I mean, that makes perfect sense too, because I feel that, I mean, I think I had a very, I had probably like 6-7 years that felt like childhood, and then had to grow up super fast. And I think became an adult really between the ages of like 8 and my Saturn return, I would say. And then my spiritual growth began in earnest right before and leading up to my Saturn return. And then I would say that my actual conscious evolution has felt more like regression plus responsibility, as opposed to like growth. It's like how to become younger and preserve and enjoy those things that I didn't necessarily get to experience and enjoy as a kid, but with responsibility that, you know, I didn't have then, or based on what you're saying about second stage Scorpio, like, which I didn't really take probably for a few lives.
Yeah, see, now the other thing is that when we're going through the stages of our sun sign, because our moon sign is the sign we did before we're the sign we are now, we also relive the stages of the moon sign.
Okay.
With your moon in Sagittarius, the moon is also of our childhood experience too. And actually the thing about moon in Sagittarius is that that's a very happy little kid. I love that. Sagittarius, you know? And if you were doing the recap lifetime, it was a super happy little kid.
Very.
But what happens in seconds, the only thing about Sagittarians is they get criticized. In first and second stage, they get criticized by the dearest, they get criticized by partners. So, you know, there would have been that sense of, I'm happy and I'm sincere, and why does everybody think I'm doing everything wrong? But then your Scorpios go, okay, well then I will do things wrong.
Absolutely. And I definitely think that what happened to me even more so was that instead of consciously choosing to do the things wrong because it felt good, I think I was doing, let's just call them like these more aggressive, irresponsible actions.
Yeah.
Because of, like you described so perfectly, that was stunningly resonant with me, just about the guilt, a weird guilt of like, what have I done? And little known fact, and I wonder what you make of this, I was a twin until 7 months in utero.
Wow.
When I was born, I didn't know until many years later. My mom told me, but I never really put the pieces together until I was in my 20s, and then realized that I had carried a tremendous guilt, a tremendous survivor complex, and a tremendous guilt of like but the person who read this, you know, I had found this out from my mother, but when I received this information in a reading, the person said we were presided over by the spirit of this nun, and that the nun was like our mediator that helped me and my brother talk it out, and that we decided together that I was the one to go forward.
Yes. Wow.
And that brought me a lot of peace to think that it was a mutual decision, and that we actually weighed it out. Who's going to have a more, you know, who's going to be able to accomplish their purpose more effectively, you know?
Wow.
And so that was before I had started any kind of spiritual studies that I got that reading. And I was just so shocked, Taina, because it brought me so much peace and so much relief. And then my spiritual evolution, my growth, my actual growth when I started meditating and studying, was I was doing inner child meditations every day with the spirit of my twin, who over many months morphed into a guide, into a very powerful guide.
I'm not surprised. Your son in the third house, because when people have sun in the third house, it can often mean that you have a soul tie or a soul bond with a sibling. In your case, it's a unique situation because it's an unborn sibling.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, that's also how I've understood my Scorpio too. It's like, what a beautiful symbol of transference for the life of my sibling to transfer, and for their life force to be swirled into mine, so that I can then go out and fulfill this purpose.
Exactly. And then you're almost there. You know, I remember seeing a world where all incarnated inhabitants are, like, in a sense, binary souls, so that there's always another soul that's there on a non-physical level.
Yep.
And constantly there's a constant interconnection, telepathic co-creation that's going on.
Yep.
And that's what it reminds me of. And then you actually have a look like what I've seen of beings from that world. This gets out there, but you know, that's
I love it.
We see stuff that most people don't see.
Totally. And I think that's a great example of, you know, you affirming that for me. That's what I always try to remind people, that the evidence is not necessarily in the verifiableness of what you just said or what I'm saying, but like, I don't need verification, because when this reader told me this, it made sense and it brought me peace. And it's not pleasant. It's not like, no, don't worry, sweetie. She basically was like, no, you absorbed your twin, you know? And I was like, oh, thank God. That's why I felt so crazy all these years, you know, but but the other thing I was just going to tell you, and I think this might have to do with the replay of the lives too, where it's like, I, from a very young age, felt a tremendous sense of urgency, and I had no idea what I was here to do, but I knew it was something, and I thought, because of how I was raised, that I was just supposed to be famous, and that I was supposed to like get on TV and like do all this shit. And I'm sorry, I thought I was supposed to get on TV and do all this stuff of like glory, you know, make your name, put yourself out there. But that revealed itself over time to be not a purpose. That was just like a thing to do. And you know, the transition for me was when I realized that like the purpose was to seek the purpose, you know. And so then it was around my Saturn return where I started making my mission about, you know, not even needing to know my purpose, just knowing that I needed to be of service, because I was raised in the restaurant business too. So it felt very organic for me to just try to be of service. But it's only now 10, 12 years later that I realized that the seeds, but that the seeds for my spiritual service were planted because of my restaurant service. Yes. But I almost burnt out as a reader, because I was trying to run my psychic business the way my mom ran her restaurant as a kid, which which was unsustainable. Work constantly, always say yes to everything, make sure everybody's happy, perform, ask if everybody's happy. Are you happy? But that's not how it works. I can't sustain like that.
Right.
So
True.
so it's much more, only now am I realizing, and I wonder how this has to apply to third stage, only now am I realizing that these elements of my being which are created or cultivated, maybe what I sort of went back to first stage to retrieve: my voice as an artist, my voice as a writer, my voice as a healer, my voice as a teacher. That, like, if I'm really, in the however many years I have left here, gonna show up for each of these practices, that's a lot of work, and it's more than enough.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yes.
But I in some ways, the majority of the last 10 years, or even my whole life, last 30-some years, were me searching for meaning and purpose and utility. I've always been obsessed with being useful somehow. Searching for it.
Rising piece as well.
The Virgo rising piece. Searching for it, thinking that I was failing miserably.
Yes.
Only to then realize that I had succeeded at something else.
Yes, right. And now that does tie into second, third stage, because when we go through second, third stage, each sign has certain riddles they need to resolve. There's certain keys to resolve those riddles. So for Scorpio, the two keys that resolve everything, and they are basically summed up as faith and self-forgiveness. So that as you forgive yourself, whether it's remembering what you did in the previous lifetime and or just being extra kind to yourself and extra caring, be compassionate for any actions you have taken, and what was your motivation, what was your feeling, what was the innocence behind that action, even if at the time it didn't work out perfectly, even if at the time other people got hurt. There's another important key, that when you start to view things from the soul level or from the spiritual level, you know that everybody is responsible for everything that they experience. That includes the fact that when people come into a situation where they experience hurt, their soul is choosing that for a specific purpose. It's not, you want to be careful not to blame the victim for things like that. But there are reasons why people will get drawn into situations that are unpleasant, and sometimes they have to do with guilt. Sometimes that guilt is necessary, sometimes it's unnecessary, and that's that second stage Scorpio, which gets hurt in unnecessary ways. As soon as you forgive yourself, you release that pattern. Sometimes it's the only way that a soul can wake itself up and recognize, no, I won't do this to anyone else. So stopping a negative pattern you once had. And sometimes people will go into situations where they know, okay, I'm going to have to go through something really rough here just in order to achieve what I need to achieve in this situation. So in other words, it's Scorpio has to get away from blaming themselves for absolutely everything. In first stage, it's all my responsibility. In second stage, it's all my fault. And at the same time, in first stage, no mistakes would have been made if you were working in complete alignment with spirit.
Right.
And so that's what I call faith, which is really a bad word for it, because it really means being completely aligned with spiritual beingness, with your own spiritual being, with the one spiritual being, allowing that divine intelligence to act and express through you and to inform all of your understandings and all of your decision making. What's really interesting is that Scorpios are the original skeptic of the zodiac. And the reason for that is that in first stage, the purpose is so all-encompassing. You cannot go by quote unquote faith. You really need to send a man over and see what's on the other side of that rock. We got to get it, got everything under our conscious control and understanding. So if you're going to trust in something that you can't see or touch, or that somebody else can verify for you, it's too much of a risk. So when you mentioned, when we were talking earlier about some things may not necessarily be verifiable, that's definitely speaking from the third stage Scorpio perspective.
Well, and it's funny too, because I think there's a connection here. I started reading tarot, but over the years and since I first met you, I've come to identify much more so as a channel. But this doesn't mean that I just open up and surrender to whatever. it means that I'm calibrated to recognize my sources or not listen to those sources. But there's a certain element of my gift is at its best when I get out of the way, but
Yeah.
not so far out of the way that nobody's running the show, but just enough out of the way that I, Michael, can watch my body being filled or with something coming through it. And I can then sit there and go, ooh, yeah, no, I didn't say that. You know, that wasn't me. It's almost, by practicing channeling, it allows me to be a skeptic of the information coming through me, because I'm not the kind of channel that says just because it came through means it's verifiable.
Right.
I'm saying,
yes.
I know that I'm providing a service to you with my body that I've studied, you know, and practiced a lot. But when our reading is over, Michael will come back.
Yes.
You know, when your reading for Medical Spirit is over, Michael's going to come back and we will talk about what came up and do our best to interpret it together. And then I get to function more as, you know,
yes.
as coach and facilitator than needing to be the one who knows all the time.
Yes. Yeah, and that's a kind of positive humility. And that's where it's valuable to have gone through second stage, because it gives us that sort of kind of positive humility. We know, yeah, we can really mess up pretty badly. So we're inevitably never infallible. But because there is that putting the self aside and focusing on the purest of intents and receiving an infinite perspective, you're gonna probably bring through a lot more quality than someone who would sit there and say, my word is law, and I am completely infallible. That's the funny,
Totally.
ironic paradox. But again, it does bring to mind, some of what you're saying brings to mind that Virgo rising, because Virgo rising also is about discernment. And I also have Virgo rising, and I do a lot of similar, I have quite a similar perspective, you know, and I always tell people it whenever I can, anything that anyone ever tells you from a psychic or a spiritual perspective, run it through your own inner voice. And it should line up with common sense. And I always have loved skeptics. One of the interviews I did a little while ago was with someone who said, you know, I'm interested in talking to you about this, but you have to know, he said this to me before we did the interview, I'm a skeptic. I said, great.
Excellent. Yeah.
I love skeptics. And you know, when you are a curious skeptic, but you're still a skeptic, I don't think we should ever set that part of ourselves completely aside.
No, because that's also the kind of thing that allows information that's passed by a skeptic that checks out becomes very easily communicable. It becomes so much more easy to share, and direct experience, but also, you know, checked with that discernment feels pretty stable to me. You know, I can get behind that.
Yeah. So what I talk about Scorpio as being is a vehicle for divine will on earth. The vehicle, you know, and it just, the will acts through you. And that's exactly what you described. Another thing that I talk about Thursday Scorpio as being is a miracle worker. Because you develop, even from the very beginning, from the very word go in first stage, there's focus. And that's where the eagle symbol comes, because eagles are fascinating creatures. You know, they can fly so high. They have incredible eyesight. They will actually sit and watch sunspots because the sun doesn't harm their eyes, but they can be way, way up, miles up, and watch a little mouse under the grass and swoop down and grab it. So there's this ruthlessness that remains an aspect of the Scorpio consciousness, but it's only ever used in a very clean and pure and specific way. So a Scorpio healer has massive, gentle compassion whenever that's needed, and absolute ruthlessness whenever that's needed.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And that's, I definitely, well, and again, I think my Virgo rising and my tendency to be all the frick over the place, thanks to my Sagittarius moon, you know, that those two things together made me really have to understand what I'm doing and what spirit is doing and what I'm offering and how it all works. And, you know, even after I met you in 2012, you know, I moved back to New York soon after, and it was a totally different world of doing readings and, you know, and there, because I had to be able to speak so much more articulately about what it was that I was doing. And so what's interesting is I've always made a practice of knowing when I don't know, but I very much over the years have articulated a space where I don't know, but I got a pretty strong awareness of what's going on outside of that space. And if I can calibrate that space, then I don't have to cause the miracle. The miracle occurs, you know?
Yes, that's right. That's true. Because that's the only way miracles ever do occur.
And I'm seeing so much more too. I was reading about the fourth ray from Alice Bailey stuff, right? And its association with Scorpio as being you know, just how it's like, because it's in the midst of the rays and in the midst of the chakras, that the creation of a space for spirit to do their work is the most we can hope for, you know?
Yes.
And I think I was always setting myself on a spiritual path. You know, in terms of the criticality of my Virgo and the obsessiveness of my Scorpio, I was almost making it a spiritual practice to list all the ways in which I was undeserving of being able to make miracles, right? Instead of just doing my practice, showing up, forgiving myself, as you're saying here, having some faith and saying, you know what, no matter how corrupt and worthless I believe this vehicle to be, that just happened, so can't be all bad, you know. But I think I had for many years, and still to some extent at my worst, I have this sort of obsession with purification and this sense of needing to be good enough and clean enough to receive or transmit grace, you know. And I get what you're saying, that comes from sort of like second stage, you know, flashbacks, right?
Yeah, definitely. Now, that's one thing that you brought up that's sort of interesting, because once a person is in third, actually one way to tell the real difference between whether a person is actually in second, third stage or third stage, very simple method, is, are you happy?
Yes. Oh yes. It's funny.
Third stage, there's bursts of happiness. In third stage, there's bursts of unhappiness. But in general, third stage people are really happy. That's the default setting.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like you said, I had it when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I lost it for a good period of time. And then I even, like I said, this one reader directly said to me, no, the sort of first big shamanic death that I had, which was like, okay, if you don't change your ways, this body is going to go. You're going to be done. Whatever you think you got to do, too bad. You're going to die if you don't do something different, right?
That's very common for second, third stage. Yes.
Okay. So
they just want to die. It's pretty much the same effect.
So when that happened, it was a result. Well, I should just tell you what happened to me. I mean, because I'm not hiding it all. When I was 17, I contracted HIV, and it was after coming out around 14, 15, 16 in very difficult ways, and having a series of beautiful, brilliant, gorgeous, talented, you know, intelligent individuals profess their love for me. And I was just like, no. You're falling for what I'm showing you. You're falling for what I'm showing you.
Wow.
If you knew what was really going on in here, you would run. You're so stupid, you know. And what this reader told me was that it was a series of very aggressive assertions. I'm not lovable. You can't have it. That actually created so much space and isolation around me that the only way I could have stood a chance to continue and do my dharma would be to catalyze something that would make me realize if I didn't crawl out of the mud, I was going to stay in the mud, and that was where I was going to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty intense. Yes. Now that would be the end of second stage proper, when the person hits that, because people will hit a major crisis that is just impossible to escape from or to not wake up from. I mean, if you really, really, really hung on tight, some people do, and there are some indications in people's charts that that's what they did in their previous lifetime. Hey, you were supposed to move into second, third stage, and you gritted your teeth and you hung on and you refused to do it. So now in this lifetime, the whole lifetime is going to be pummeling away at you until you wake up. But in general, that's what happens to people. It's your absolute life is completely threatened. Your emotional life is completely threatened. Your entire purpose. You really hit a wall, and you just have to crack. You have to break through it. And then the transition continues on, and you work through all of these different riddles that you spend like I said, 1 to 4 decades on average resolving. And often towards the end of second, third stage, there's another point where you just can't take it anymore. Just want to die, or you hit another ceiling. And what happened to me actually was I hit that ceiling and became very, very suicidal. And the next summer, I remember sitting working on something, and I started thinking, well, wait a minute, this is really, really weird, because I've been happy for at least the last 6 months. Like my entire lifetime, I had never experienced something like that. I would have these little bursts of happiness and then go back to the hell and back to the agony. I said, I'm thinking to myself, that's pretty strange. And I'm looking at myself in the way I am right now, and I've got an awful lot of traits of a third stage Aries. Oh my God, I think I'm in third stage. It's like I didn't notice for 6 months.
Totally. No, totally. And given that, I mean, I would definitely say to you, like, my reading practice and my spiritual work, it's almost like it's almost like it took off for me, because there's a part of me that's always been fine, that's never had any problems, that's been very happy. And I can see that I learned that from my father. My father was like an earth angel. My mother was like a nightmare. She was like always in crisis. And my dad was like gorgeous and tall and made her feel secure, and was always, when I would be hysterical as a kid, he would go, C-A-L-M.
Wow. Cool.
Right? And he would just, and he had these massive hands that were always warm. So there was this through line, and I don't know how this connects to what you're saying, but I'm pretty sure it does. This through line of okayness through my whole life. Wow. That I only feel conscious of and able to sustain. I would say maybe for the last 18 to 24 months.
Wow. Okay, so I got you.
Really?
You're in here now.
I think we're here, and it had to do with the passing of my dad in 2017, and everything that's kind of gone on since then, and the way I've put my life story together, because I think my identification with the trauma that had happened earlier on kept a large portion of me frozen there. And therefore neither, the baby Krishna that I am, nor the responsible adult that I am, because it was all locked up. So even since quarantine has started, I've been working on a memoir project to externalize and objectify what actually happened to me, so that I can try to tease out like a fun story from it. But I've been working on this project now, Taina, for 4 years or so. And I went through periods of months where I just had to get out the horrible things that had happened, because the prevailing rule in my family is that they didn't actually happen. None of these things happened, right? So I would be like, pay attention to me, pay attention to me, pay attention to me.
House.
Yes.
Neptune in the 4th house is lies and secrets in the family, everything being, put the fog over everything.
Absolutely. And like a prevailing moral order coming from my mom as the kind of, arbiter of truth and the one who wears the pants and the one who needs the most and all this stuff. So my point is, though, is that during these last 2 years, as I've really dug into the material, I would go through a period of writing about 6 months in my life where all this stuff happened. And I would get sick, I would get toxified, I would get re-traumatized. All these things would come out. And I could say to you that the last 2.5 years or so have been a series of changing my life so that I can get into that story, and my life changing as I get into that story. Because in some ways, using the language that you're saying, it's like I was basically have been trying to capture the worst parts of my second stage Scorpio and like some of the first stage joy, when really the book that I've wanted to write all along is about the through line of third stage Scorpio. Yes. And all of these things that I had to sort of reinvoke or take on in order at the end of the day to be of the best service, to get out of my own way, to allow myself to be a vessel for spirit, and I'm telling you, I've been psychotic since I met you, even about, oh my God, if I can do a reading or if I can do a healing and I can make a meal and I can write a play, how are all these things supposed to go together? And how do I know the difference between what is my own selfish satisfaction and what is my dharma, right? And I started taking voice lessons because I wanted to give myself a little bit of a present. And I realized that my voice hasn't gone anywhere. And I almost had to forgive myself for not allowing me to express myself artistically because I've been so psychotic about making money and being of service. Mm-hmm. So it's like now moving forward, I'm just recognizing that this is enough of a mission for me to be well enough to share some of that wellness with others, use my gifts to channel spirits for readings if I need to, or to channel characters in a play if I need to, or to channel spirit when I want to sing something or whatever, but the forgiveness and compassion part in the last probably 18 months, 2 years, I've been creating spiritual formats using my artistic skills, or artistic formats using my spiritual gifts. So one example is an improv show where I do readings with audience members from the house while my friend who's a comic makes fun of all of us.
Oh, wow.
So I'm just saying, it's like I've lived in so much unrest for so much of my life, but in the last couple years, I'm starting to tease out a through line of not even joy and happiness, but just like okayness.
Yes, yes.
After thinking that so much of that time was actually miserable and in the mud and in the depths, and I deserved it.
Right. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so when we get into third stage and we have that underlying happiness, and really the higher self has always been there. It's always been with you from the beginning. But in first stage Scorpio, you thought it was something outside of yourself and far away, but it was actually still going, yeah, he'll figure it out eventually. Because the higher self has forever.
Yeah.
The higher self is glad you've joined it right now, but at any rate, that's why that happiness has always been there, but you weren't aware of it. But then now it is that undertone. It's that resting place we go back to. It's just a natural way to be.
Yeah. However,
when we are in third stage, especially if you've been into third stage in the current lifetime, people born into third stage don't seem to have this. But if you made that transition while you're in the lifetime, there is a thing that I call knots that happens. And those knots are little replays of little bursts of second stage stuff that come out from time to time that need to be worked on and need to be resolved. So you're having a knot, and it's a brief little, you'd call it a crisis or a mini crisis, and then you resolve it, you sort it out, and you keep moving forward. The reason I call it a knot is because of a metaphor I use for what it feels like when you are in second stage. When you're in third stage. The second stage is crappy, but we're in denial a lot during it. So we don't really always
could feel great.
Actually. Right. In second, third stage, you know how painful it is. God, make it stop now, please. And what it feels like is that you're in this hellishly red pit with this hopelessly entangled rope. And all you can do is you can just keep pushing one little piece at a time and untangling a little piece. And it seems like it's pointless because you still have this big mass, and you just keep doing a bit at a time because that's all you can do. But eventually the little mini miracle happens, and you end up with a long rope that just has a few knots left in it. You throw the rope up to the top of the pit, and something on the other side of the pit grabs hold of it and pulls you out. And that something is your higher self. That something is also subconscious inertia. Because really, these different parts of ourselves really are all one.
Mm-hmm.
And the subconscious has its inertia that holds you back for a long time when you're in second, third stage.
Right.
But the subconscious is imprinted by any strong emotion and any repetitive experience. So as soon as we have the repetitive experience of constantly reaching for truth, of constantly interfacing with our higher being and higher dimensions, that eventually the subconscious gets in the habit of that and goes, oh, okay, I get what this is. It merges with the higher self. And it's that force that pulls you out of the pit. So then you still have your rope and you still have a few knots. And that's where the concept of knots comes from.
Makes sense.
And into third stage in this lifetime.
Makes sense. And because I definitely, I think also my, Virgo rising has caused me to build systems that help me survive and thrive, and then other systems that are not helpful and that keep me down. Yeah. No, and there's also this healing that's been going on, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this, but just the idea of sacrifice. It's like I've always wanted to sacrifice things that I enjoy because I thought that's what you're supposed to do on a purificatory path, that I should if I like it, I should probably kill it so that I can do my service better, right? But what I've, in trying to be more compassionate with myself over the years, and also in recognizing that I grew up in the restaurant business, so it would be weird for me to not eat bacon. It would just be very weird for me. I could see it, but if you asked me, could I be a vegan? Sure, I could be a vegan. Am I a vegan? I don't think I'm a vegan, so it's I could go there. So that's always been something that I think caused me to waste a lot of time, or not waste, but use a lot of time during my second stage and during a lot of my life. Yes. Usually it would come down to sex, it would come down to food, it would come down to pot, because I don't really like drinking, and so for many years, those indulgences it's almost like I would reward myself with them because I felt so bad, and then it would make me feel worse, and then I would reward myself to feel better, and eventually I realized it's actually going to be a lot more useful if I only engage in these, to excess in these things, if I'm already doing my service, if I'm already well in alignment, if because go ahead.
See, that ties into both your Virgo rising and your moon in Sagittarius. So Virgo rising is, not all Virgo rising people have this, but it is a karma that can go with Virgo rising, which is a history of gluttony, basically, and having gone to real extremes in previous times. And that gluttony could be food, sex, pot, whatever the list you gave, or other things you didn't put on the list that aren't peculiar to you. But the Virgo rising wants to be, it's about purity. So is this purity, all this extreme indulgence? No, I don't think so. So then it tries to push you in the opposite direction. And it does create these wonderful systems that can strangle themselves with the systems. I went through that, trying to eat all raw food when nobody was doing it yet.
Right.
What to do. And it's out of all the things I've done in my entire life that step outside of the box, which I live outside of the box anyway, that was one of the hardest things to do. It was one of the most socially alienating things I could possibly experience. Plus, I have a really fast metabolism, so it just wasn't physically. It wasn't physically doable.
Right. No, and so I guess that's what I'm kind of wondering is, how does one know at this point what to sacrifice and what to give up? And is it just because I like something, because I desire it, because I want it, that I should sacrifice it?
No, that's coming to the moon, because what happens in second stage Sagittarius is that, well, first stage Sagittarius, which is your oldest soul memories. You were a happy, happy soul, and you just trusted life, you've really gone from the serpent's head to the serpent's tail, because in the very beginning of first stage Sagittarius, you had perfect faith, you trusted life, and everything worked beautifully for you because you trusted life. It's just that you had no conscious understanding of that science. And you saw, yeah, exactly. and you saw everybody else suffering. You couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And they were all criticizing you. What are you so happy about? You're so irresponsible being so happy. And so you felt bad about yourself. You felt bad for them. You went looking for some truths that would save the world. And because your self-esteem was low, because everybody was stomping on you and you thought, I don't know who I am, you were in an overcompensatory perspective about it all. I'm going to find the really important thing that's going to make sure everybody's perfectly fine, saves the entire world. It's going to be extreme. So second stage Sagittarians go to extreme philosophies. And it sounds like you have a combination of the second stage Scorpio guilt, whatever I want, whatever I want to do hurts people, must be bad, combined with, and I don't know if you have any past life awareness of this, a second stage Sagittarius, strong religious indoctrination, that desire is bad.
Definitely, most definitely. And it was that one past life was as an Orthodox Greek priest,
right?
At like really pounding the pavement. And I'm baptized Greek Orthodox in this life. Amazing. And in 2017, when my father passed, I was psychotically compelled to go to Mount Athos, where all the Orthodox monasteries are. So I went there, and on the way there, I went to Medjugorje in Bosnia and climbed the mountain and prayed to the mother and heard a voice. It was the mountain of the Mother Mary, so who knows whose voice it was, but who knows? It was a lady's voice. Yes. And she said, I am the Queen of Peace. She said, your life is not one of sacrifice and suffering. Your life is one of nurturance and offering. She said, all things go through my son, but you are a child of mine. Wow. Right? She said, so everything's going through Christ. And this was the day before I went to the island. Okay, so then I go to Mount Athos, and I end up, because of this person that I met, he convinces me to go to confession. I haven't been to confession. I went once when I was 12 years old. So I went to confession, and before the confession started, I said to the priest, and there's no, door. You sit right across from the priest. And I said to him, before we start, I don't like to tell lies. This is very Scorpionic. I don't like to lie, but I choose my words very.
Go ahead.
Yes, I choose my words very carefully. So I said to him, ever since my father died, his faith was reaffirmed. That's why I came to this island. He was Catholic, but ever since, he died, he had these visions of Christ and Mary, and that reaffirmed my faith. And ever since he passed, I've heard a woman's voice. And if I listen to what this voice tells me and I share that with other people, it seems to help. Like, how does this all reconcile with my faith? And the guy was like, your dad was Catholic? And I was like, yeah, but like, that's not the point. And he was like, wait, but you're Greek and you're Orthodox. And I was like, yeah, but like, again, not the point. And I was like, all right, look, I'm gay, right? And I was like, how does this reconcile with my faith? And he said, well, it simply does not and cannot. He said, you need to go home to your partner and tell him that you are endangering each other's souls, that what you're doing is terribly wrong. You have to leave him. You have to find a priest. You have to ask if he'll hear your confession. Then you have to, he said you have to fast, say the prayer of the heart 1,000 times a day, go to church on Sundays, fast every Wednesday and Friday, and no sex at all of any kind. And then after several months of that, then find a priest, go to confession, and he'll tell you if you can have communion.
Wow.
Right? And I was like, well, we're done here. We're done here. So I just share that with you because I believe that I did have that past life indoctrination and present life indoctrination. And I'm obsessed with that idea. Like, isn't that the definition of karma? Like, I didn't choose to be Greek Orthodox. I didn't pick that. I mean, maybe I did. Of course I did. But from my early life, I did not ask my parents to baptize me. I chose parents that chose to baptize me in that way, you know. So it made sense that I would be guided after my dad passed to the center of my home of spirituality, you know, the center of spirituality in my baptized church, to face this guy down, tell him my truth, and then based on his response, be like, no.
Yes.
So second stage, Scorp guilt, and second stage, what was the thing you said about the Sag?
Serious indoctrinization.
Got it.
Because you went looking for truths, and this truth is the extreme truth that's going to save everybody. And there's many forms of extreme truth, and many second stage Sagittarians will have more than one in their soul history. Mm-hmm. And in a way, that's a good thing, because then you can step outside of it and pick the good stuff out. Going to the mountain and hearing that divine voice, that's a good piece. You know, there's good pieces to Greek Orthodox. There's good pieces to absolutely every spiritual and religious system that there is. Stunning. But whenever something is taken to an extreme that is that robs you of your free will, that says this is the only way, then you know, yeah, okay, I'm done here. You know, it's just it's based on a real crystallized egoic fear. Mm-hmm. That reinforces itself by creating institutions where groups of people reinforce each other and help flog each other's backs or whatever the case may be. Right. But none of it takes us within. None of us takes us to spirit. And none of us teaches that desire comes from God. All desire comes from God. Now, I talk about pure desire and impure desire. And a pure desire is when you want something for its own sake. Mm-hmm. An impure desire is when you want something because you somehow convinced yourself it's going to give you something that you want. Mm. So I always use an image of the two men who want Rolls Royces. One man wants a Rolls Royce because he loves the smell of the leather interior. He loves how smoothly it rides along a country road. It's an exquisite machine. He adores it. He can spend the day with it, and he's happy as a lark. The other man wants a Rolls Royce, or a woman wants a Rolls Royce, because when his neighbors see him pull that vehicle into the car, they're going to know how important this person is. That is an impure desire for a Rolls Royce. Right. And who's going to get themselves into trouble with that one?
Right, for sure. For sure. Because then all of a sudden, you know, if you get the Rolls Royce and you're the first guy, then you're like, wow, this is making me like even more present in myself. I'm available. I'm ready. I'm open. I'm here. And the other one is just going to pursue whatever he thought he was getting. That becomes his purpose, because he's basically just trying to achieve that ends. Mm-hmm. And obviously the Rolls Royce is not going to bring enough of that. So he's going to probably keep pursuing that motivation after he's already gotten the thing.
Yeah, exactly. And what he really needs is self-esteem.
Right. Right. And you know, I think that's what I love about that happiness question. It really empowers me to just, I always say to people, why do we have to be living our best lives? Why is that's an awful lot of pressure to live your best life? You know, why I aspire to like basic, general, constant okayness, knowing that I'm not going to have that, but just like going for like milk toast, beige, vanilla.
I love it. Yeah, that's one thing I remember realizing when I was like, I think 28 or something. It's like, wow, I don't have to fulfill my purpose in this one single lifetime. There's a long stretch ahead, and it can be done during that long stretch. I don't have to do it this time around. Oh, phew.
And I think as soon as I accepted that in myself, like everything I did became something that fulfilled my purpose, as opposed to it being like a pot of gold that I was going to jump into.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Because it's inherent in your beingness. As soon as you're in your beingness, you're going to be on purpose.
Yeah, and my beingness happens to like cheeseburgers every now and again. Just for the cheeseburger in and of itself, not for what I think it's going to bring me.
With this Rolls Royce and have a great conversation about it today. Well, you have your cheeseburger, and he sits there beside the parked Rolls Royce, and you have a nice little chat in the sunshine. Yeah.
Share some presents.
Okay, so I think we're probably going to close now. And I know you and I could talk forever for sure.
Anytime.
But this was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much.